Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Respecting the Beer. My name is Gary Yarn, and with me, as usual, is Bobby Fleshman and Allison McCoy.
Hello.
Owners of McFleshman. Do you realize that McFleshman is a lot like Jennifer? That it's a combination.
Turns out, but
Yes.
It's the opposite. It's her name and then mine.
That's true. I dominate.
But we got some guests this week doing something a little different, having a round table discussion. Why don't you both introduce yourselves?
I'm Steve Lonsway. I'm owner and brewer and janitor of Stonearch Brewpub here in Appleton and Little Chute.
And Oliver?
Oliver Behm, owner of Hop Yard Ale Works. My wife is my partner in that endeavor, but she is not here because somebody had to work today. So
Fair enough.
you guys got me.
So we've talked to Bobby and Allison about their story, about how they launched this place and why they got into it. So why don't we start this out by talking to you guys. How did you get started in brewing?
Oh boy, so it goes way back. 1990 as a college kid. I wasn't really a beer person at that point. Dabbled in it a little bit, but came home for spring break and my brother and a friend were homebrewing. Didn't even know it was a thing at that time. It turns out my buddy found a kit at a rummage sale, found some ingredients, and we're whipping it up. So I was trying to get involved with it, and they kept elbowing me out, having their own fun. So kind of watched the process. Again, didn't know much about it. Bought a starter kit, went back to college and started playing around with it. At the time, I was outside of Chicago. So to get ingredients, I had to go into Chicago. And being a poor college kid, I didn't have the opportunity to do that too often or afford the stuff that I was buying. So I didn't brew a lot, but I enjoyed it immensely. After I graduated there, I went to a study abroad program in England and fell in love with beer. I fell in love with the English pub scene and everything about it. So it just captivated me. Came up with the idea to open up a homebrew store, which we did in April of '93. And I ran it full time for many years, and the passion just it got uncontrollable. At that time, I was the homebrewing was really catching on at that point. So there's a lot of new toys, a lot of new things out on the market to make homebrewing more successful and more fun. So it was my job to try all these things, try all these new ingredients that were hitting the shelves. So I was brewing constantly. I can say it now with statute of limitations being passed. You could do 100 gallons a year. Yeah, I was probably doing about 100 barrels a year. I was brewing a lot. And unfortunately, I have a lot of drunk friends, so they drank it. And I just kept getting better at it. In '96, I think it was, I went to the Siebel Institute of Brewing Technology to learn on a commercial scale how to do it. And shortly after that, I took a job at another local brewery and ran that. Actually, two of them. So I was the Corporate Brew Master for them for about 6.5 years, won some national awards, got an ego. And then had the opportunity to take over a pre-existing brew pub, which was at the time Adlerbrow. It's the third one in the state, opened in '89. We took it over in 2004. And I brewed for the first, I'd say, 10 years, pretty much myself, and then started bringing other people in as we grew production, and voila, here we are.
And as you know, Adlerbrow was the brewery for Appleton back in the day.
It was, yes. So Adlerbrow was actually George Waltrip Brewing Company, started in the 1800s. They were located where the Appleton Police Department now resides, and they shut down in '72 with the national pressures of the big brands coming in. So they did not survive that, unfortunately. But we did happen to find a recipe from 1946, randomly stuck in a logbook. We've resurrected that recipe now, and we have some big grandiose plans for that in the future.
And that's the one that's named Adlerbrow.
Yep.
Cool.
And the notes didn't use units like what would be like. It didn't use ingredients like bog myrtle or hogshead
It was
and units.
46, not
Yeah, I know.
1846.
But a lot of these old recipes you find you can't even
Well,
translate.
honestly, the recipe that we did have, it said first we didn't know how big of a batch it brewed.
Right.
It just gave you the amount of ingredients, and hops literally said hops. So I had to do a ton of research to find out what was common in that time. Back then there wasn't many varieties like there is now. So it's our best interpretation of the 1946 recipe that we found in a logbook.
Okay, Oliver, why don't you explain how the Hop Yard got started?
Well, my story is nothing like Steve, so that's kind of hard to follow. We're the new kids in the block.
Wait. I'm going to interject. And I say both of your stories can be summarized by you decided to ruin a perfectly good hobby by opening a brewery.
Right, yeah, I mean, I think the joke that we have is that we try to figure out what is the most expensive way to enjoy beer, and that's opening a brewery. It's painfully expensive. It is.
Amen.
Yeah, I mean, my story a little bit different because it didn't start with brewing. I think it was, 20 some years ago. My wife and I went over to England and we just drove through the countryside. We had no plan. We, just rented a car and drove, and we found ourselves stopping at all these pubs, spending the night upstairs after we got too snookered up. And I think for me, it was seeing the pubs over there and how people interacted at them, as opposed to like here, it was all just sports bars and drink until 2 a.m. And over there, it was like families coming after work and people getting together and friends meeting there. And then all of a sudden they would go home. And it was like, whoa, this is really cool. That's kind of where it started for us. But we had no idea that we were going to open up a brewery someday. We just kind of fell in love with that atmosphere. I've got 4 children. So when they were smaller, we couldn't afford to go on long vacations. So we would just do like weekend vacations, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, whatever. We had a passion for food and beverage, so we'd always find like the most unique bars, the most unique restaurants. We'd always hit them up. That slightly turned into us just going to breweries and only breweries. And then what we found is at a brewery, it reminded us so much of over in England where, friends are coming together, people are meeting new friends, there's families coming together, they're eating, they're drinking, and then they're going home. And it was just a really unique, special place, and we just fell in love with it. And I wanted that in my life. We wanted some of that joy to be part of us. We were in a different industry and it would get stressful. And I'd always say to my wife, like, are we ready to open up the brewery? In fact, I think our code word was actually like taco truck. Like, you ready to do a taco truck? Even though we had no intention of doing a taco truck. And then she just kept saying, we don't know how to brew. We can't do this. And I would just say to her, well, someone's got to, every brewery starts somewhere and every brewer starts at the beginning. So why couldn't this be our beginning? And then COVID hit, and the world gets turned upside down. We just weren't happy. And we went, is this the time? And the moment she said yes, we went in full gear and just went crazy with it.
So you decided a global pandemic where everything was shut down was the time to open up a business.
Perfect timing.
Yep.
Yeah. We weren't doing anything anyways at the time. Everyone's, sheltered in homes like, oh, let's build a brewery. Where our brewery is now, we gutted the whole place. We built the whole thing from the ground up ourselves. And a lot of help with family and friends. And along the way, we had to learn how to brew, which was fun. Amy went to school for it. Of course, it was online because of the pandemic. And then we just started buying what we thought we needed. And that's changed dramatically now that we somewhat know what we're doing. But yeah, it was a pretty wild ride for us just because we came of it more from the fact of like the taproom side of things and the community side of things, as opposed to, I was homebrewing in my basement for 20 years. That didn't happen. So I was just a little bit of a different path. But what I find so interesting about this business is if you talk to any brewery at any time, they all have a different story of what got them in and how they got there. And there's no one recipe where like you have to do it this way to be successful. Everybody does it a different way and they can be successful. And I find that really, really cool in this industry because it's kind of unlike any other industry out there.
Well, and the support from the other breweries is something this industry exhibits that almost all do not. And so a newbie coming in, I'm sure you've had conversations like, hey, how do I do this? Or, hey, can you borrow me this? It's really cool.
Yeah, I'm
It's
pretty
second
sure our
to none.
first batch of beer, I had to call Bobby and borrow kegs because we didn't have any to put
Sounds
our
about
beer
right.
in.
I think keg washing was involved at some
Keg
point.
washing, yeah. I'm like, how the heck does this
Well,
work?
And one of our most viral social media posts was it was the weekend you open or it was the weekend after Hop Yard opened that Bobby and I go over there and I just take some pictures and I post like, hey, new brewery in town. This is exciting. And like everyone's just like, yes, new brewery in town. We're so excited.
Yeah, we are very happy to be part of the brewing scene in Appleton.
Yeah.
I think it's a special place and there's a lot of room for growth. And it's pretty cool that we're a part of it.
Let's talk about that because you guys are obviously friends. You work together, but at the same time, you're also kind of competitors. How do you balance that?
We drink with each other a lot.
I was about to say, there's a lot of beer.
The A-Town Misfits, right?
Yeah,
Right.
Because you don't represent. And there are other breweries in this town other than the people sitting at this table. There's the Appleton Beer Factory right
Yeah.
over there.
Yeah.
How many can this town support?
2 more.
how?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
Well, look at how many bars they got.
That's true.
Well-
and they're all doing fine.
And there's a lot of volume being consumed of Budweiser, Miller, Coors. So that sort of answers your question. How many people want to drink craft beer as opposed to those beers?
But also, as Oliver pointed out, that these places are not places that you're going to go and close down at 2 a.m. Most of us close a little earlier. Like our hours, we go till 11 in the summer. But you go out after work, you go have a pint, and then you go home. And if you can do that, 2 or 3 nights a week, then you could go to each of these different breweries and just have it be part of your daily ritual.
Yeah, I think we're really only scratching the surface on craft beer, especially in Appleton. I mean, I know it's all over the country, and it has been for a long time. But I think what craft beer still only occupies 12% market share, compared to the big boys.
Money, it's 20%, but volume is 12.
So I mean, there's a lot of room for growth. And what I'm seeing, just being new in this industry in Appleton, when we first opened, everyone was coming in the door going, "What's the closest thing you have to Bud Light?" I haven't heard that anymore. Now it's people coming in and they want fruited sours, they want IPAs, they want some weird stuff. I mean, this area is craving good beer, and it's just growing by leaps and bounds.
And I think it's about quality over quantity too. I think that's what the craft beer industry is about.
That's a
in
big
part.
part
Yeah.
for sure. Well, and look at Asheville, North Carolina.
Yeah.
It's a town about our size, maybe a little bit bigger, and I don't even know how many breweries they have. A ton.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think they've got like 12 or 13. 3 of them are right next door to each other. So I mean, they're
Right.
just
Right.
literally
and then
one after another after another.
Sierra just built their huge
Oh,
facility
that's Mecca
just
in the beer world.
outside of
Yeah.
town
Yeah.
in Nashville. It has like hop gates that are
We could do a whole
made
podcast on that.
bronze. It's
Yeah.
insane.
Yeah, that's a beautiful.
Let's get King Grossman in here.
One of the things I found interesting is that both of you said that at least kind of the germ of this idea came from a trip to England. You had an advisor from England that you brewed for.
And a trip to England that inspired this. So yeah.
Yet this community in Wisconsin in general, its brewing tradition is really German. Is there still any of that, what you took from England or what you got there, are the type of beers that are part of what you're brewing or part of your businesses today?
100%. Our flagship is a Scottish ale, so for sure. One of my favorite styles is an English bitter, which is it's like a 3.5% beer, super easy drinking. We have tried them in the past. Bitter is not a word that people want to associate their beverage with. So as long as you call it something else, we always do well with it.
We make one and hit it in an acronym.
Yeah.
It's called
Exactly.
McFleshman Special Bitter. Yeah,
The
MSB.
MSB.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're more of like the IPA scene. I mean,
Mhm.
we're going in a different direction a little bit, but that doesn't mean that we don't brew those things, love those things. I mean, we've done English bitter; it was great, but we're on the weird side of IPAs. I think that goes back to your comments about like how do we all get along when yet we're competitors. I don't think we are, because we're all brewing different stuff,
Yeah.
and that kind of helps us all get along.
Well, and your hazy is different than my hazy, than your hazy. And, my dad's a big hazy guy right now. And
Never
I
heard
know
of
too.
what's a hazy? I'm sorry.
Yeah. I remember you saying, I'm not going to be brewing New
I'm
England
sure I
style."
did. I'm sure. We weren't doing a podcast then, so there's no record of that.
And that's the thing. You can make every beer style many, many, many ways.
Yeah.
And,
But we also, I think we respect it, because when we first opened, so Bobby worked for you, Steve, for a few years.
Yep.
And we were first opening, we were thinking about, okay, where is the market currently, and what beers can we really push with our flagships? And I absolutely love that Scottish ale. Oh my gosh. I was like, please, can we brew this? And Bobby was like, yeah, but if we do, we need to make sure that it's not,
We can't brew
we
a
can't brew a
Scottish ale.
Scottish ale. That is the Stonearch has that. And so we need to think of something that's going to be complementary to that. And so I think in figuring out how our brands develop, we take into account the family or the community of brewers around us to do so. Because Appleton Beer Factory, they're really pushing kind of some more of the American styles like Hop Yard. And so I think we can really, because there's so many different beer styles, we can all kind of work together to say, okay, who can then take kind of that lane, who can take that lane? And we play in the other lanes as well. But in terms of how we define our brands, I think we respect the direction each of the brands are going.
And it was Steve that gave me his books on beer engines. And that
Cask conditioning.
and cask
Yep,
conditioning.
yep. I'll never forget that. What do you want? You asked me what
Yeah.
you wanted. I wanted you to work on.
Yeah.
And I said, cast conditioning.
Yeah.
I swear you had a SOP built the next day.
Yeah, I went home and I rebuilt the engines and polished them up, rebuilt the cylinders, and
For those who don't know what a beer engine is,
it's like a water well hand pump. You think of it that way. You just approach the bar and you pull that pump back and forth. You fill a glass with 2 pulls usually, but that was because they didn't have carbonation to push the beer out of the keg back in the old days. And there's a few other reasons, but anyway, he got me down into this rabbit hole, and it became a lot of what we do here these days.
That's a big English thing.
Yeah.
You see them all over.
It's all
the
associated with
country,
English beers, yeah.
And it's romantic too.
Yeah,
Just seeing that
yeah.
handle pulled.
Yeah.
It's pretty sexy.
let's talk about the business part of this. I've been to both of your establishments. You guys do more than sell beer. You also have food that's available. What's the breakdown? How much do you think is food versus beer? Do you see it as two different things? Are they complementary?
Yeah, we're definitely a restaurant that serves our own beer. We're about, depending on the season, 35 to 40% beer, or liquid, I should say. The rest is food. So again, primarily restaurant. We like that balance because it kind of levels the field for us. We also have a party room. You know, we're in a big, huge, old historic building. We have a comedy club on the top floor of our building, so we get those maybe not craft beer drinkers coming in quite often, and we want their money too. So they're going to be the ones asking for the Bud Lights, which you're not going to get at our place. So they'll have a mixed drink and some food. So.
And I've literally seen it happen at McFleshman's where someone said, "What's your closest thing to a Bud Light?" So if someone comes in and wants that, what do you give them?
Some, depending on the
Lagers.
bartender, some will hand them a glass of water. Actually, and what we'll do is we'll steer them depending on what we have on tap, because you know we have 14 beers on tap at any given time. So it's really up to the bartender and how they can sell it. Scottish Ale is one, and even though it's an amber style beer, it's very low bitterness. That's what freaks people out mostly, is the bitterness, and color does. But if we get them past the color freak, it's a low bitter, great tasting. It's got a little sweetness, so it's easy. It's very palatable, and so that's usually the go-to.
So at Hop Yard, we do pizza, and it's just pizza. There's nothing else for food. I think when we started, we had this. I think everyone goes back and forth on, should we have food? Should we not do food? Some people are successful with it. Some people just pull their hair out with it because it takes a lot to make it go. But we have been at breweries before where they don't have food, and then you get hungry after you've had a couple beers and you leave. And I didn't want that to happen at our place. We wanted to, people to be able to stay longer and eat. So we thought we should do some food, and we thought, well, I mean, pizza goes well with beer, and everyone loves pizza.
And it's simple.
Yeah, and you can put anything on a pizza, and we
I
do.
mean,
don't
having
need
dabbled my toe in the food business a long time ago, which is something I never ever want to do again. Pizza is like, you got one thing you cook it in. It's just the simplicity of the menu, and everything has.
Yeah, I wish it was simple, but it's not.
Yeah, but it's simpler than pizza and a fryer.
Yeah, I mean, it's, we do wood fire pizzas, so we've got this great big wood oven, and she's very temperamental, and it's difficult. And my wife does a great job with the pizzas, making up some really, crazy ideas of what we put on pizzas, which is wild. But when we first started, I think that helped us get out of the gate, because we weren't as strong with beer as maybe some of the other breweries that start, who've been doing this for a long time. So when we started, we didn't even have our own beer on tap. We had all guest taps, and we had our pizza. So we became known for our pizza right away, which is awesome. It's not what I wanted to hang my hat on, but that's what got people in the door and kept us alive until we grew our beer program stronger and stronger. So I think right now we're more about the beer than we are about the food. But
It's still damn good pizza, though.
I appreciate that.
Oh, yeah.
Very
But it
good.
took us a couple of years to get to that point. And now it's just, who knows where it's going to go from there.
And we'll hear the beer factory story in the future, our neighbors here, but they did something similar. They added food because they didn't want people to leave. And then the food took over. It was immensely successful for them. I'll let him tell whether that was a good thing or not, but
And you guys
Yeah.
don't do food at all.
No,
not really.
no. I mean, you can
pretzels and
purchase
chips. And
jerky and
Yeah.
chips and popcorn.
we're just giving you something salty to chase the beer and stay on premise. And then food trucks are here often.
How much of your beer sales is on premise versus do you do any packaged, canned sales?
We do packaging. We're distributed pretty much on the eastern half of Wisconsin. It's a big part of our production as far as sales, because the margins are tighter in the outdoor market. The numbers would be I'm going to say they're about 65 to 70% off premise versus in premise, but profits, that's a different story.
Right. Yeah, those keep the people paid back in the back to make the beer.
Exactly.
that's what that does.
And we look at that when you see our beer at Joe's Bar in El Segundo or wherever, that's advertisement.
Yeah.
That brings people to our door. And
Yep.
the beautiful thing that we have in this industry is the beer connoisseurs chase brew pubs. And in getting back to the earlier question, you know, are we all competitors? Well, you know what? You get people into town, they're going to visit all three.
Yep.
They really will.
And there's a
Or
story,
four.
I'm going to butcher it, but Fritz Maytag was the owner of Anchor Brewing Company, which is topical, but we'll talk about that later. That he tells this story about how brewers are not like shoe salesmen, or they are in the day, in that they're competing to knock each other off the handles. But then at night they meet up for beers and they share their secrets, they share their process, their recipes, and all these ideas. And the shoe people go home. He just picks another industry. It could be any other industry he tells that story about. And I think that is unique to us. Like, we do finish the day by having beers with each other and sharing all of the trials and tribulations.
Are all your sales on premise?
Pretty much. There's a couple places that we distribute to, but it's not a lot. And we do that just to get our kind of feet in the water a little bit and see how it's going to go. We do have plans on doing some distribution, but 95% of what we do is in-house. When we started, we had a very small system, so everything that we made was being consumed on premise, and we just couldn't keep up. I mean, we've doubled our production now, and I still can't keep up. So people are really drinking a lot of it at our place, which is awesome. But there's also that aspect of you want to get out to some places as advertising and be out there in the world. So I think it's a balance for everyone. Some people do it, some people don't. I mean, Hop Butcher in Illinois is famous for just get it at their place. There's a bunch of them that are out there in the world that you have to go to their brewery to get their beer. It's not a one size fits all, but we'll see what happens for the future.
You said your signature beer was a Scottish ale.
Correct.
Is that something that just happened organically? Like, is
It
that what people
was-
picked, or is this like this is the beer you're proud of?
Very much so what I was proud of. It's more what my wife made me make.
Atta girl.
So she is not into the hoppy beers. She's not into the dark beers. And still to this day, she's not. So early on, I was homebrewing a lot of English style, Scottish ales, Irish ales, and things, trying to find something that hit for her. And then that was it. And it's the least I could do, because I literally trashed her kitchen over and over and over again. So in order for me to use her kitchen, I had to make her something. And I took years and years and perfected it. When I was at the other brewery, I brewed a Scottish ale that won several national awards. And when I left there, I took that recipe and scrapped it because it wasn't what I liked, even though it was award winning, and kind of rebuilt it in the way that I want it. And it works out really well. It's won many awards, not the national ones that the other one did, but I'm real happy with it. It's more true to style, in my opinion, and it's got a little more smokiness. And yeah,
I can
it's
speak to
huge
that
part
beer.
of
When I was working with Steve, I think maybe you went from around 500 barrels to 3,000 barrels in a span of a couple of years.
Correct.
And we were doing 4 turns a day on that one beer.
Yeah.
That's a lot for a brew pub to make in a day.
Yeah, it's a lot.
If I come to the hop yard and I say, give me your signature beer, I'm only going to have one. What are you going to serve?
Well, I mean, it'd have to be a hazy IPA, but I'm going to convince you to have more than one. There's not one. I mean, I think if you ask anyone in our brewery, they all have their own favorite of a version of a hazy that we produce. I couldn't say I love one more than the other. They're like my kids.
So true.
I think the one that I love the most is, it's called Flight of the Nectaron, and it's a New Zealand IPA, and it's it's an awesome beer. But if you ask my brewer, it's probably his running teeth first, that his first IPA that he made for us, and my wife will probably say something completely different. So it's hazy IPAs is definitely our jam. It's what we love. We make the other stuff. I do have to go and get away from hazies quite a bit, because you can't just drink those all day every day. So it's nice to balance it out with a lager or an Irish red or something like that. But yeah, I'm definitely pouring you a hazy IPA if you show up.
What's your second one?
Second one favorite?
Yeah, well, if you said you're going to force suggest another one on us, which will that be?
The one that I like probably the most is called Krull the Warrior King. And there's a joke about the name, but we call that a no coast IPA. So it's like hazy like in New England, but bitter like a West Coast. I mean, the IBUs are ridiculous on it. So that one throws people for a bit of a loop because they are looking at this hazy beer going, oh, it's going to be a juicy IPA. And then they take a sip and they're like, oh, that bitterness is killer. But that's what we wanted out of that one. So that's probably one that I'm proud of because it doesn't fit a style profile, and sometimes it's fun to brew beers that are not in the constraints of, well, this is true to style. I know you guys love doing true to style stuff, but
Right.
Go
Die on that
detriment
mountain.
we like getting out of those lanes.
Yeah.
I want to touch on something you mentioned. You made this Scottish IPA, won a bunch of awards, and then you monkeyed with it. And we've talked about this on a previous episode as well, about at what point when you create something, you just like, okay, I'm leaving it alone. You walk away from it. This is the recipe. This is what people are going to be used to, as opposed to continual tinkering with the recipe.
Well, personal preference is number one. Obviously, talking about being true to style, there are styles that we want to be true on style, but you can't invent new things if you keep doing that. Hazy IPAs, for instance, that wasn't even a thing back when we started. You couldn't even sell a hazy beer. If you sold a cloudy beer, people wouldn't buy it. So the beautiful thing is things have changed dramatically in that direction. But even those that won national awards, it wasn't true to style, in my opinion. So when I rebuilt it, I wanted it to be more of that true English, Irish, Scottish feel that made me fall in love with the industry. Of course, I couldn't brew what they had going too, so I had to change it up, and super happy with what we came up with.
If you talk about monkeying with recipes, I think in general, most consumers don't quite understand how hard it is to make a beer over and over and over and over again and have it taste exactly the same over and over and over and over again. So it's like once you nail one and you're like, that's a great beer, you don't necessarily tweak that recipe ever unless you can't get an ingredient. But typically you're just going, making it again is hard enough. But then you just play around with doing other beers. So maybe you take like a beer that you're really proud of, and then you're like, let's just play around with it on a different batch and see how that will go. But you're not going to mess with that original one necessarily.
These are some smart guys across the table. They're not obsessive like I am.
Yes, I'm
I
wondering
know where
why
Alice
on
is
earth
going.
why have you? Oh my goodness. Well, no, but one of the things, and we were actually just talking yesterday. So we have an IPA. It's called our Stepchild, and I was like, wait, how did Stepchild come to be again? And Bobby said that, oh, well, somehow there was the wrong malt went into our 547 and it came out red instead of the kind of golden yellowishy color. That
And it
it's
happened
supposed
at
to be.
where they packaged the malt. So we don't know.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
it was somewhere
what it
like
was.
it was upstream from us, but we followed the recipe the exact same way, and yet this different product came out. So Bobby was like, "Oh, I guess I need to add some hops now to this
Make it
brand new
different on the
beer."
fly. Yeah.
And then it became kind of this secret. Everyone really loved it.
Mistake they would like to see
mistake.
annually repeated.
Yeah.
So that's been fun to reverse engineer.
And so I think that some of those happy accidents can occur, but only if you're really in tune with what the recipe should be, what the style should be. And then if there are deviations along the way, this is where the creativity of the brewers come in, because they're like, oh, there was a mistake or there was something off. How do we make this new beer? Because the other thing too is that we've put money into the recipe. Those ingredients are expensive and you can't just dump a beer. I mean, if it's gone bad, yeah, but you want to salvage it the best you can.
We had a beer that we actually called Happy Little Accidents because I can't remember exactly what went wrong, but something went wrong. So we had to change it on the fly. When we did that, something happened where we didn't write down all what we did because we were just panicking.
Right? That happens so often.
And it was such a good beer. Everyone loved it. And people are like, make it again. I don't even know how we made it. So it's like impossible to make this beer
I don't know
again.
which is a better reason to keep notes so you avoid mistakes or you can repeat the successes.
Exactly, yeah.
Been there, done that.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to wrap up this episode then. Thanks again for listening to the Respecting the Beer podcast. If you enjoy the show, remember to subscribe in your favorite podcast player to get every episode. And also make sure to follow our Facebook page and support us on Patreon. Links to both of which are in the show notes.